welcome everyone. This is our first publicly available workshop as part of our Grad School 101 series with Cientifico Latino GSEC, which stands for Graduate Student Engagement and Community Program with the Cientifico Latino organization. So thank you all for coming and making time of your day to be here with us. A little bit about myself. I am your co-host and humble moderator. My name is Sergio Labra. I am a fourth-year graduate student at Scripps Research in La Jolla, California. And yeah, I have been with Cientifico Latino for a couple of years now. Cientifico Latino has honestly a wide diversity of resources for everyone going, involving undergraduates, people applying to graduate school, and current graduate students and postdocs. They have a very extensive database of paid summer research opportunities, different fellowships, examples for applications. We have a mentorship program for people applying for grad school. And we are part of GSEC, which caters to first-year graduate students. And so if you want to learn more, you can just go to cientificolatino.com and join us there. We are honored to have our panelists here that are also graduate students that have made time to join us and share all of their experiences and knowledge and wisdom with us. And we're gonna be opening with kind of a question on how you found the lab that in which you find yourself now. How did you know that it was the right fit? So we'll get started. Do you want to get started, Sara?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. It's really great to be here. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name is Sara. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in Earth and Environmental Engineering at Columbia University. I'm originally from Spain and I came to the US for grad school. And I work on electrochemical CO2 capture and conversion. So I look at new materials for this and as well as for other electrochemical applications. In terms of how I ended up in my lab group, so I work in a Lisa Parks group at Columbia. I think maybe my situation is a little bit unusual. So in my program, you actually just join a lab group directly instead of doing rotations, which I know is very common in other programs. So I can't speak about that as much, but I directly joined the group when I was coming to Columbia, and I had been in touch with this advisor through my undergrad advisor. So I had already kind of planned to join the group when I arrived. So I would say, essentially, I just got a little bit lucky. I think looking back, I didn't really even realize how important it is to choose an advisor in a PhD program. I really have learned from being in this program and talking to other grad students that that's something that can really make or break your grad school experience. So I think it's really great that all of you are obviously thinking about this, but I do have some thoughts about how to identify a good advisor. So I think it will be useful to be a part of this conversation and hopefully tell you a little bit more about what I've learned and what's important to look out for. So yeah, really great to be here. I meet you all, and thank you Cientifico Latino for putting this together. So I'll pass it on to our next speaker.
Tanisha?
Hi. Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Tanisha London. I'm also a fourth-year graduate student at University of Southern California in the Neuroscience program. I am in Andrew Heyer's lab, and we study sensory processing. I specifically look at the role of the neurotransmitter norepinephrine role in sensory integration and processing. And then in regards to how I chose this lab was actually more roundabout. I came to USC specifically for a different PI. And then when it was my first rotation and within that lab or within that experience, I realized that that wasn't the environment I wanted to work in. We can talk more in depth about it throughout the time, but once I realized that that environment wasn't exactly what I wanted, I did other rotations. And then I chose this lab because my PI, I knew I didn't want to go into academia after, and he has a lot of like connections within industry, and he also like prioritizes going to conferences and like always having really like innovative technology, which would be really useful in industry, learning those techniques. So that is how I ended up in this lab. Okay, answer.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Hazel, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Yes. Hi. So I'm Hazel Ozuna, and I am a PhD candidate at University of Louisville in Kentucky. I worked looking at the interkingdom signaling between bacteria and immune cells during chronic inflammation. And we mostly look at it using periodontal disease as a model. As for me of how I end up in my lab, so when I came here, which was the main reason why I applied to U of L at all, was because they have a BSL-3 research center. So I was like, yes, I want to work with BSL-3 and BSL-3 bacteria and stuff like that. But then when I came here, they do allow us to do rotations, but all the labs that work in BSL-3 did not have funding, so they don't let you join a lab that doesn't have enough funding for accepting a student for a certain amount of years. So that was out of the question. So then I had to play my cards right. So I thought about what type of training I wanted to get out of my PhD. And that's how I end up in the lab that I am. I actually am between two labs because I decided I wanted to kind of like bacterial pathogenesis. So I have one boss, her lab is mostly immunology with neutrophils, and the other one is more of the micro side. So I was able to create this cool project between the two. And also because of the qualities of both PIs, especially one of them, he's really good at writing, and I wanted to improve my writing techniques. And I told him this when I was rotating in the lab, and he did help me with it a lot. So it was basically that, like what I wanted to get out of my training, and based on that and the environments of the lab, of course, I picked the labs that I'm in.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have a perfect diverse array of different programs, different paths. So we should be able to help answer all of your questions. So kind of to get us started, when doing the rotations, people ask like, are rotations still part of like an interview process? And along with that, should they be asking about funding before committing to a rotation? Tanisha, want to?
Sure, yeah, I can take it. In my experience, I did talk to a few PIs before joining, and some were very open that like, unless you have a fellowship already, I have no funding, and unless you have like a very specific technique you want to learn from me, there's not really any reason for you to rotate because I can't fund you. I have heard some PIs that are not as upfront, and they let you rotate, and then they tell you after the fact. So I would suggest asking ahead of time so that you're not in a position where now you have one less opportunity to rotate. Because I look at rotations as like a free trial period. Like you want to make sure that you really enjoy the experience before you sign on to it long term. So I think you should ask ahead of time.
Anyone else? Hazel?
Yeah, although here in our program, they don't allow you unless the PI can secure funding for up to 5 years for a student. They don't allow you to join or rotate a lab unless it's just towards the end and it's just for like learning lab techniques. But I think like Tanisha said, it is like a free trial period and things like that, because that is gonna affect like the pace of your research. Like, let's say you having basically financial problems in your lab, to like how quick you can get certain things you need for your research and things like that. You have to think of the future. So that's just gonna make it difficult time-wise, or like how much you can do for your project of what you're gonna need. So it's definitely something that you wanna bring up in the case that it's not programs that limit PIs based on that.
Yeah, kind of a little related and broadening the scope. What are the questions that really you should be asking your potential PIs on deciding or not to join a lab? Sara?
Yeah, sure. I think that's extremely important. I was thinking about this this morning, kind of like thinking about the event today. And I think it's important, the most important thing you want to get out of talking to a potential PI or people in their group, I think, is trying to determine whether you can align your expectations for your experience in a PhD program to what the PI expects of you. So I think that's how you really can angle that discussion. So I think first you have to do a little bit of introspection of what do I want? And then based on that, you can take questions to the PI. So I think it's important to kind of start with general questions like, what do you expect of graduate students in your group? How do you see your role as an advisor? But then I think it's also important to ask questions that really pin down things that are important to you. So for example, I think thinking about the management style of the PI and how that aligns with what you expect is very important. So that's, I would say things like, is the PI hands-on or hands-off? So you can ask kind of that question, and you can ask that a little bit more vaguely, like how often do you meet with your students? What does your like group meeting structure look like? And I think even things like, how do you deal with a project that's not going well? How do you respond to that? I think that also falls within that. And other things that are important to you. So for me, like work-life balance is important. So I was upfront about asking PIs about how work-life balance looks like in their groups. I think that's also a good question. And lastly, just kind of throwing other thoughts out there. I think it's also, you can learn a lot by asking about alumni in the group. So asking like, oh, so what did the students who were in your group previously, where are they now? Did they go into academia or industry? And you can learn a lot from that as well. And of course, funding was touched upon a little bit in the previous questions. So that's a very important question as well. But yeah, I think those would be kind of things I would ask about the first time around.
Tanisha?
I think Sarah hit everything on the head. Only thing else I would add would be talking to the current grad students as well. Like if they're, if they're happy with the lab and with the way in which the PI manages the students and how much, or their students and how much time, maybe like look at how long all the grad students have been in the lab. If they're, upwards of like 7+ years, maybe you can just figure out, what's taking so long for all of the grad students, like see what trends that they all have in common, because that's more so a reflection of the PI, not the students.
Anything you'd like to add, Hazel?
Yes, I think also like it's important if you have an idea what type of training or what you want to get out of your graduate school, you should bring this up. Like, for example, in my case, like I wanted to not just lab techniques, but also improve my science writing. And this is something that I discussed with my boss, and he helped me through it. Like we'll have kind of like practice writings of different things. Then it was like, he told me to apply for a grant too and all that stuff. And he helped me through it. And it wasn't just like this is wrong or whatever. He like, you know, the whole thought process, why saying this and that. So let's say you want to be exposed to training other students. You can ask, it's like, do you have grad students mentor other students, like undergrads or master students and things like that. So that's also something if it's important for you to discuss.
Yeah, no, those are excellent points. The soft skills that we develop through grad school, you will not get the same level of mentorship from every PI in those areas. That's a very good point. Now, regarding what actually happens with the rotations, what happens like if you would like to leave a rotation early, you realize it's not a fit, do you have any advice on how to leave them early, you know, maintain the bridges, anything, any advice?
I think that you should probably have a conversation, unless it's like a very toxic situation. I think you should have a conversation with the PI first to see if your needs could be met and like see where the disconnect is. And then if that doesn't work, then I would talk to the like chair of your program or the dean, and then kind of figure out what that lab was lacking, and then how you can get that. And like they should know, the PIs that can provide you with what specifically it is that you are missing from that experience.
Anyone else? If not, what happens if you don't like any of your rotations? What do you do then?
In some cases, you should, like, for example, here it has happened to some of the students and they discuss this with so you have the chair and then you have the graduate studies director. So they're usually like in more direct contact in supervising the first year students. You can discuss with them and sometimes they give the option of doing an extra rotation when in those situations.
Someone asked if we can get like a list of sample questions to ask. We touch a little bit upon this. I think we can prepare a resource for after the meeting for the attendees to share some potential answers for some of these questions. Thank you for bringing that up. Additionally, how do you make a good impression in a rotation? Sara, any advice on at least on the even before you, like when you were deciding on which lab to join, interacting with the PI, any advice on how to approach the PI, what kind of questions to ask?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. I would say the most important thing is to just show genuine curiosity and interest for the work that is being done in the group. And it will really show if you have done your research beforehand. So if you have looked into the website of the group you're joining or you're planning on joining, you've checked out a few of their papers, you know roughly what projects they have, so you can kind of go into the meeting already having some specific questions. And I think if you're seriously considering joining a group, this won't feel like homework. It will just feel like, oh, you're just genuinely curious about what work happens in the lab. And I think that will really show when you first meet a PI. And that's not to say by no means do you have to go and read like every paper that has been published in the lab at all. I think just having a few questions prepared beforehand can be very beneficial. But I think in most cases, the PI will just kind of will just be interested in knowing more about you. So genuine interest from the PI will like also come through when you have those first interactions. And you don't necessarily have to, worry about reciting your CV perfectly or anything. I think it's not usually more of a genuine discussion led by the PI to learn a little bit more about you. And if you can show interest in the work that's being done in the group, I think that's already a great first step. But others might have other things to add, I think.
Hazel? Have anything
Yes.
to add?
Yes, I feel like Sarah said, to be curious and also show initiative. I feel like when I have mentor students like that come and rotate, like they're like I'm showing them a technique or something, and then they make questions, even if they seem stupid questions to you, like you are learning something. But the wanting of knowing, of learning, I feel that kind of gives a good impression. Also, like, for example, if you have an idea, throwing ideas that come to you too, that kind of like shows your thought process too. Yeah, I think initiative and curiosity are important.
Now, if you had to like summarize which will be the key aspects that you should be focusing on when choosing a lab, what is most important? Science, the lab environment, the boss, the opportunities, the recognition. Sara, you look like you have a
That's just
better
a
answer.
really important but also broad question. So I think some of that comes out of, again, like the introspection of you knowing what you want to get out of it. And I think people will have different things that make it to the top of their list. I think if I had to pick like key well, I think first of all, you need to think about the research area and topics. So if you're someone who wants to be working on one specific thing, and then when you graduate, you want to go to industry and do this one specific thing, then obviously that's going to be a huge consideration. But if you're someone who is genuinely just excited about research and you have some flexibility of different areas, that's maybe not going to make it up there in your list as much. I would say if I had to make a list, I think I mentioned previously management style and direction. I think that's extremely important to be in alignment with your PI. I think also just overall support for your career goals. So for example, I want to go into academia. So for me, like publications are very important, like help finding a postdoc will be important down the line. If I wanted to go into industry, maybe doing an internship in industry would be important. So I think just having a PI that supports your career goals and is really just a cheerleader for you overall is really important. And I think also just finding a PI that supports the work-life balance that you want for yourself in grad school is really important, because that, I think that's also a significant factor in just your like happiness and mental health during your PhD program. So I think just thinking what's important to you, and you'll find an environment that kind of can make those things happen. And within those, there's lots of like sub questions you could ask. Someone asked about resources. I was just looking online, and there's like lots of resources with specific questions for all of these that I can post or we can share. But I think those three things would be my main criteria.
Anyone else will have a criteria that wasn't mentioned yet? Sara? if not a little related, how do you think about the trade-off between a new lab versus a more well-established and recognized lab? Is that something that can affect graduation time? Like, how do you go about balancing these options? Tanisha?
So in my experience, I found that more established labs offered less room for like intellectual freedom. So I did a rotation with a more established lab. The pluses were that he had plenty of funding, and depending on like what it is you're interested in, he assigned grad students projects and assigned them like what to do, and you didn't really have much freedom. Like, this is your question, it's what you do, and then once you figure it out, you can graduate, because he has a plan, or they have a plan for their lab, and like it's kind of structured in a specific way. I found that early investigators are a bit more open, they're a bit more flexible, because they're still in the process of like figuring out where they fit in the field and where they want to go. So they may not have 10 questions lined up already. They're open to the grad student, like, figuring out their own question. And now you have the intellectual freedom to go kind of like look at different things. And if that's what you want, that is great, which is kind of what I wanted. The downside to that is that could take longer, because it's not like you have to design and develop this entire experiment on your own, which is a skill, and it's a learning experience, but it can take longer to graduate. So if you are interested in getting in and getting out, maybe a more established lab could help you also, because they've been around longer, so they have more experience in getting grad students out.
Anything you will have to add, Hazel?
Yes. I think it's important for, I think it depends, at least for the labs that I've seen. Usually a newly established lab, especially if it's a PI that is on basically in line or on the track for tenure, they need to get publications out. So you're gonna be most likely expected to work more, but also you will likely be in publications sooner or in more of them, versus a lab that is established, that it depends on the productivity of the lab. Because usually like after their tenure, maybe like the urgency is not as much, but then again, it depends on the type of lab. So there's that. I do agree with Tanisha with some of the flexibility of like you bring in your own ideas in some of the projects. Although it does depend, like one of my bosses, my main boss, he actually retired. So I'm his last student. And he did allow me to like bring my own idea to the project. But again, it depends on the labs. So it kind of depends like what type of speed and how soon you want to graduate. Yeah, I think, the speed and how soon you want to graduate has on which lab you want to pick. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think Tanisha and Hazel have very good points about how to really, depending on what you want and your style of mentorship, one may fit better for you than the other. Would any of you have advice as to like how to really identify who will be a good PI, like someone that will celebrate your milestones, that will be really having your back, versus someone just looking at you as a workhorse or a brain on a stick? Anyone?
Yeah, I guess I don't mean to be repetitive, but I guess it depends on the type of person you are. If there's some people that don't necessarily need to be celebrated all the time. In my case, I do like, you know, when I'm not seen as a brain on a stick, and like my effort, at least, not necessarily my milestones, but my effort is acknowledged. So again, if depending what is okay with you. I think from either lab, because not necessarily the PI, they just might be like the type that they're just like goal focused. And it might make you feel, you know, that you're a brain on a stick, although you have the other options too. But yeah, you have to think hard. What do you need that extra like push, or like, you know, being like acknowledged of your work, or are you okay with just like doing your work, and, you know, like, are you like basically self-motivated? I will put it like that. So
I agree. I also don't really need much external validation. So for me, a good PI wasn't based on like celebrating me. It was based on like supporting my goals and like helping me get there. So I'll give an example that like there's a lab here that is like kind of notorious as being like one of the best labs at USC, but he has like 10 grad students and they operate more like an assembly line kind of thing. He has, you know, students that do specifically one thing. He has students that do specifically one thing. And then collectively, they have a very well-functioning lab. And then yes, you get papers, you get to be very skilled in one specific thing. So then if you go off whatever it is you want to choose to do after you graduate, they're all in, you know, top companies and they're doing great. So like to some people, that's a great mentor or PI. For me, that wasn't, because I want to be able to learn a lot of things. So I wanted a PI that had his hand in like different, you know, like different skill sets, and encourage me to do those things, opposed to just like, yes, like being a workhorse essentially, and just do what they tell you to do. But like Hazel said, it kind of depends on what it is you want. So you have to take some time to be introspective and figure out what it is you want to get from grad school and who will be the best person to facilitate that.
Sara?
Sorry, I was just going to briefly add, going back to the question, that I think for some things it's easier to get kind of a sense from talking to grad students in the lab than actually directly asking a PI, because no PI will say, I see my students as a brain on a stick, right? Even if they actually do. So I think you really can get a lot of useful information by having chats with, I would say, like, talk to every single grad student that's in a lab group. Like, the more information you can get, the better. And, you know, I think sometimes you can ask a little bit like open-ended questions to grad students, like, what's one thing you had known before you started working in this lab? Or like, how did your PI deal with like you experiencing some setback? Or if you failed at something, would you be open to like going to your PI and reporting this back? Or would you be a little bit hesitant? So I think you can like kind of sense what the environment is between, like what the relationship can be between PIs and grad students just by openly asking them. And while I'll say, like, I think a lot of us like sometimes don't feel like we need so much validation. There will be, or maybe this is just personal experience, but there will be lots of moments in grad school where you feel like a little bit discouraged, or you feel like your work is not getting anywhere, or your project is failing, or it's very daunting to, you know, prepare for this qualifier exam. And if you have a good enough relationship with your PI where you can kind of openly share that and hear their thoughts, I think that can also be something that's really great, and you'll get a lot of good feedback in that sense as well.
No, that's great advice. Thank you. Now, if you could go back, what would you do differently? You know, knowing what you know now. We can get started with Tanisha.
Okay. I would do a few things. Oh no, we would only do one thing differently. So like I said, I came to USC for one specific PI. And when I was in that rotation, it was my first rotation. I realized like basically all the things we've kind of covered. So for one, his management style. He wanted everyone to be in lab at 8 a.m. No, if you're late, it's a problem. We start experiments immediately at 8:30. Like you get settled, everyone's on the same schedule. And that wasn't really ideal for me. I kind of wanted a bit more hands off. And then his management style, mentorship style. He specifically really only knew how to train like up and coming academics. So when I said like from the beginning, I really wasn't interested in going to academia, he was just kind of like, okay, well then I don't really know how to help you. So yes, I became a bit discouraged because like this was the main reason I came to USC. So for a while there, I kind of stuck it out and like tried to fit into the lab and kind of just make it work. And then for my second rotation, he asked me to like stay for the second rotation. And then I decided to go to a different lab, and this lab was like so different. The PI, like he shows up whenever he kind of feels like it. He says you can show up whenever you feel like it, as long as whenever lab meeting is, you have something to show. I don't really care what your work schedule is. He often like works out and bike rides throughout the day, and he'll invite us to come with him. So like that was very different. But like you want someone that prioritizes health and mental health and overall well-being for the student. So then like I really leaned into that. And then you develop a relationship with the PI outside of the professional like relationship. But what I would change is that the reason I came to USC was because that specific PI was doing science that I was really interested in. This PI, I had no idea I had no idea what sensory integration was. I didn't study that before. I was studying like metabolism and the role of dopamine and like overeating. So going to the sensory processing lab, I was kind of like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. He was like, that's fine. Let's figure it out together. Figure out a project that you like are somewhat have a semblance of understanding on, and then I'll make it work for you. I planned this project. He was like, I have no idea what any of that is, but go do it. I'll give you all the money to do it. Just go do it. In the beginning, that seemed great because I have all this freedom. I have the support, but it's been really challenging because it's like the blind leading blind. And I don't really know what I'm doing. He doesn't really know what I'm doing. So he doesn't really know how to like help. He's very supportive and encouraging, but I think I was too ambitious because I don't know what I don't have the skills. It takes a lot of the background of like reading papers and contacting other neuroscientists in the field that are more familiar with the topic, and then going back to my PI, tell them what they said, and then we develop a plan together what he thinks will work best for me. But that's just a lot. It's really time consuming. So if I would do it differently, I would try to find another lab that like I'm at least familiar with the topic.
Thank you. Hazel?
I will say that I still like my two bosses and two labs that I'm in, but I would have chosen the one that is my co-mentor as like my main mentor, and that being my main lab, because there's more. And the one that was my main lab is basically like everybody's just doing their own work. So although it's a lab, they don't really work as together, which makes it harder for you to get publications because it's literally all the work is on you, which is tense the time you're in grad school. Versus the other lab is like the project is yours, but you do have some help, like just even a little bit in helping out in some things, accelerates things. I think that's the only thing that I would change. Everything else I'm happy with.
Actually, a little bit on that subject. Would you have anything to say about, having two mentors versus one? Like when would it make more sense to have two mentors versus one?
Well, in my case, it was because of the type of project that I wanted I wanted like bacterial pathogenesis. So that kind of has like the immunology side and the microbiology side. And there wasn't really a lab that would do both. And after rotating in these two labs, I found an opportunity to and I got an idea of a project of mixing basically the role of neutrophils in periodontal disease and how this oral pathogen is exploiting the immune response of the other one. And I brought it to both of them, and they were like, well, that's cool, because everybody will talk about neutrophils in the oral cavity, but no one was looking at them. So that created that opportunity, and they're both great mentors in different ways. So what I couldn't get from one, I was getting it from the other one. Both of them supportive, just that one is more hands-off, but the other one is more hands-on. So I think it kind of gave me a balance of what I wasn't getting with one, I was getting with the other. So I think it actually helped. I thought it was gonna be a lot of work, but it had its benefits. Like I wouldn't change it. No.
Cool, thank you. Sara, anything you will do differently?
I think so. When I was picking a PI, I thought very much about like the research area I wanted to work on, and I obviously talked to the PI. I actually didn't talk to any grad students who were in the group beforehand, which, like, looking back, it worked out for me that way. But I would definitely make sure you do that, because I think your PI is a huge part of the experience, but the lab environment you join is also a huge part. And I ended up being really lucky, like the grad student who works, and like we work very closely on a similar project, and we're very close. We're always like exchanging ideas in the lab, always helping each other out, like peer reviewing each other's publications, and like that just, it seemed to work out that way. I know in other like lab groups, sometimes there's even like very different environments, sometimes even like competition between grad students, which is totally crazy to me. But yeah, I think just making sure you talk to all the grad students and seeing what the relationship is like between grad students, because that will be kind of like your family for 4 to 5 years or 6 years. So I think that's a really important thing to assess. And I think the other thing, and maybe this doesn't apply as much to other disciplines, but I would say, at least in like engineering, don't be afraid to join a lab group where you feel like you don't have necessarily the technical expertise. I definitely felt a little bit like intimidated working on a project that was something I maybe hadn't studied as closely in undergrad and was not what I had done my undergrad research in. But you will really like go through a huge learning curve in grad school. So I think don't be intimidated by that, and you might feel overwhelmed at the beginning. But if you're confident that the lab group or the PI is a good fit for you, and you're open to exploring a new direction, I would say like that's not an impossible thing to do, because I know a lot of people like discard groups based on that. So I think those are kind of like two things that, looking back, I wish I had thought about some more.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Now, we have a question regarding if you have any thoughts about the cons and pros of big versus small labs. Anyone want to say anything about this subject?
So in my experience, big, and we kind of talked about this, big labs tend to be kind of more established PIs, and smaller labs tend to be the newer, more junior PIs. So I think we kind of talked about that briefly. I think the amount of face time you will get with your PI can be vastly different, which makes total sense, right? If there's like, in my group, we're almost 20 people. So when I meet with my PI, I'm like, I go with my list of things I need to ask, and I'm getting through them as fast as I can. I'm like, this is what I need you to do. What do you think of this? Whereas I know in smaller groups, like I see the PIs are actually in the lab with their students. So I think the amount of time you'll spend with your PI can be very different. In some of the bigger groups, though, there is like a structure where you'll be working with a postdoc more closely than actually with your PI. So I think you need to think a little bit about what you think about that experience versus working directly with your PI, because I know some of the bigger groups that there's almost like a management structure with postdocs in the middle. So I think that again goes back to, in part, the management style. On the flip side, like big labs tend to be very well funded and have lots of resources, and that's tends to be not so much of an issue.
Thank you. Yeah. So now, just in closing, I will just ask you to name your top either green or red flags when choosing a lab, taking into account everything that we have discussed. You can just name a couple. We can get started with you, Tanisha.
We should name green and red, or just one?
Just a couple, either green and or red.
For me, I would say red flags are unhappy grad students. 1, 2, no funding. 3 would be a disconnect in the mentorship, your preferred mentorship style and what the PI can give you.
Great, thank you. Hazel?
I guess I agree with Tanisha's red flag, so I'll give some green ones. I will say that a PI that is, probably you'll get this from their students, that they're happy. You see like a good dynamic in the lab when you're rotating, or a PI that you know that they support their students in like, you know, whatever like training they want, goals and things like that. I think those are very good. Thanks.
Sara, any that haven't been mentioned yet?
I think that's mostly like happy grad students is always the biggest green flag in my opinion. So I think that's the main thing. And again, just I think I said this before, but like your PI being your cheerleader, I think that's kind of like encompasses everything. Like that's who you want your PI to be. Also, of course, like your scientific mentor, but someone who will really like, be there for you through your grad school experience.
Okay, well, then I want to thank each and every one of you for the wonderful discussion we had. I'm gonna be deploying a new survey. If you can please answer it, everyone. All of our attendees. And yes, I want to thank again Hazel, Tanisha, and Sara, and all of you for attending this webinar. And if you have any other questions or would like to be involved with the diverse initiatives that Cientifico Latino has, either through the mentorship programs, as a mentee, or as a mentor volunteer, with we really, it's really the mentors that make up the core of these programs. Feel free to again check out the Cientifico Latino resources. You can find them at cientificolatino.com.